Hi, and welcome to the Literary Sipper. I'm Amber Hill, your host, and it's been a while, and I can give you lots of excuses about that, like gum surgery that left me looking like I had been in a car accident, and any number of calendar events. But the reality is, I just took some time off, not planned, and I'm not going to beat myself up for it. There was where I thought to myself, if I didn't put out a podcast every week, then what's the point? But now I just think to myself, that's what I could do. That's the bandwidth I had. And I didn't have much in February. And it's funny, in talking to a lot of my friends who are also pursuing creative projects, February felt a little bit like a hibernation period, but also that it was very hard to access those feelings of intention that are so necessary in producing creative work. I mean, did we have the time? Probably no more and no less than we do right now. Did we have the space? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on what room you have in your home to make creative things happen. But the intention is the thing that we have. And while I spent a great deal of time writing and I spent a great deal of time playing my guitar and illustrating, there's definitely less time to make podcasts. And I don't know why that became this past month, the thing that got set aside for a while, but it did. And I think that's part of the creative process, is just knowing that you can't hold all of it in your hand all the time, and that sometimes a song or a poem or a project will rise to the surface at the expense of other things. And so for me, getting an outline done on a novel project was more important. Getting some new poems written has been more important. And honing my illustration skills has also been more important to me. It's not to say that I don't love doing the podcast. I do love doing the podcast. And I hope you share it with somebody who enjoys books and writing and all of the creative things about this life. So, having said all of that, this week's episode is going to feel not so timely, maybe, because my intention was to do it in February around Valentine's Day. But it is this idea of why I don't read a lot of romance. Often people ask me, oh, I really love romance books, and what can you recommend? And it really takes me back because I don't read a lot in that genre. It's not to say I never have, and it's not to say I never will. It's just to say that I don't make a practice of it. And I had this very interesting conversation with a bookseller recently where I was purchasing a Nook, and I'll get on that, on another day about e-readers and Kindles and all the things. But I was purchasing one, and I was talking to her about books, of course, and recommending a book that I'm currently reading called The Starling House, based on what she likes in her own reading life. And having said that, we talked about this trend of romance novels that's all over the place, every table in any major bookstore. Not so much the independents, but they're there too. But in a major bookstore, there are going to be just aisles and aisles and tables filled with romance. And it led me to think, why? Why is it now, this time? And maybe it's always been that way. When you think about Harlequin romances back in the 70s and 80s, maybe it's always been there. But right now, why does it feel like people are seeking out romance in a way that they haven't before? And booksellers and publishers are just printing them out, printing them out, sequeling and multi-book deals, and all the covers look the same and all of the things. And it got me thinking that the world is in a tumultuous state, and the tropes of romance novels are clear, and we know what we're going to get. Enemies to lovers, right? Two people in a tight quarters, fantasy, romantasy, all of the things. But we know at the end, we're going to get a story where the couple's issues are resolved. And maybe like the romance rom-coms of the 80s and 90s, they kind of end right when the relationship part, the hard part, is beginning. That's when that movie ends. You don't really get the messy middle of a relationship in a romantic novel, a romance, whether it's a highly spicy sexual kind of romance novel or the sort of rom-com misunderstandings abound Shakespearean-esque rom-com. You get tropes that are familiar to you, and in that familiarity offer comfort in a time when we're not sure how things are going to end in our own lives. We can then look to those books as an escape, but an escape where we kind of know everything's going to work out, where we're not really that surprised, and why humor is such an integral part of a lot of successful ones, or sex is an integral part of a lot of successful ones. It's the variations on those tropes that can make something a little bit more elevated. But generally speaking, we're just sort of setting the same story in a different place. That's essentially it. Here's love on a hockey team. Here's love in a small town. Here's love in a big city. But really, the tropes are all of the same. And I think that for me, that's why I'm very resistant to romance. I just don't want to read the same story over and over again. While I feel that I understand why people do and why people love it and need it, for me, that's not the purpose of my reading life, and it's not what I enjoy. It's not to say there haven't been romance novels that I have enjoyed. I totally love Outlander. And I mean, I didn't read the whole series, but that first book I was incredibly swept away in when it first came out. I think I read it in 99 or 2000. Oh, gosh, when did that book come out? I'll have to look, but it was definitely in the early 2000s that I read it. And I think I loved Bridget Jones's Diary. I thought that was in its great book. And I love Marian Keyes's books because the humor is unmatched. And she makes family saga and romance very parallel, but also very Irish in its storytelling. It's an amazing mix of a lot of different genres, but at its core, it's generally speaking a romance. And I enjoy those books as well. But really, when and I do think all good novels should have an element, a romantic element, a love element, because that's life and that's what propels us forward in our lives. And I think some recent ones that I liked, which I don't think are romance at all, but have those kind of romantic love elements to them, are Daisy Jones and the Six and Normal People. But it's not the story of the couple getting together. It's that the couple's story is a part of the larger story. And I think that for me is a lot more where I want to be and exist. And I think when the ending is guaranteed and when the escapism is real, then sometimes the lowest common denominator of those things rises to the surface because people just want to consume it fast and they want to consume it over and over again. So you don't have these like really great stories all of the time. You might have one out of every 10 of the romance novels feels different or unique or crispy or something like you've never seen before. But for the most part, what I'm noticing is that all the covers look the same. And that is really interesting, not just in terms of romance novels. I think a lot of the covers look the same in a lot of different novels. I think after Where the Crawdads Sing came out, there were like 3 novels at that time that came out with those sort of sunset covers with the block letters, and that in the hopes, I think, that book buyers would just sort of pick them all up at the same time. And I think this Tender Land is the one that kind of jumps out at me as being so similar to Where the Crawdads Sing. But I am noticing like Emily Henry's covers, who's a romance novelist, a very popular one, they kind of all look the same. And then a lot of other ones are sort of looking the same with those large primary colors, the sort of calligraphy script, and the picture that's a little bit stylized silhouettes on the front. And one thing that I noticed, and I don't know if other people have noticed, is that sometimes the back of the book, the blurb about what the book is about, is not very true to what's inside, in the sense that the story, they really heighten the romance element of a story that might be filled with sort of erotic parts. And so what's happening is you're seeing a lot of people buying books for their young adult readers, their teenage readers, that are quite spicy, that are quite erotic, and they're not even realizing that they're doing it because this blurb on the back feels very teenage romance, but inside it's not at all. I think the one that comes to mind really quick is The Kissing Quotient by Helen Huang that came out, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago. And if you look at it on the cover, it looks very similar to like the Emily Henry. It's blue. It has Kissing Quotient on this in the script. And the back of the blurb talks about the main character being neurodivergent, and she's looking for love, and she's trying to find it, and she meets this, and she's trying to find the mathematical formula for love. But inside, the book is quite sexual, and it's the guy she's trying to figure out is a male prostitute of sorts, and the sex scenes are very real and they're very vivid. And I know a lot of people who have sought that book out and just picked it up absentmindedly for their child, for their teenager, maybe early teen, even 13, 14, not realizing what was inside it because the blurb on the back didn't describe it at all. And I don't think any book should be censored or banned or anything like that. I think, it's your responsibility to have difficult conversations if they come up in books. That's part of being a parent or a teacher or an adult in a child's life. But I do think it can be quite shocking if a book's entitled The Kissing Quotient, and kissing is the least of the issues. And they're on a table with other books that all look the same, and that they're all making the same promises. And I think it can be really interesting exercise to sort of look at why that is and what they're hoping to get, audience share or absent-minded buyers. And I'm not saying, please don't get me wrong, I am not saying that I think these books are problematic in any way, shape, or form. Erotica has been around forever. Anais Nin is an amazing erotic writer, and it has been around since the 1920s. Her diaries are infamous, but so are her erotic short stories, and they're powerful and in their own right, and in terms of their surrealism and their dreamlike quality. And that's definitely literature, elevated with the capital L. But some of these, when you look at the packaging, you are making a different choice. You're seeing things in a different way. You're looking at how, processed food is packaged in shiny bags, or the candy, the cereal is at the child's eye level in the grocery store. I feel a little like that's what's happening with the romance novel at these bookstores. And I think it can be done well, but I think there's so many stereotypes going on in these books that they become cliche. And when they become cliche, then it's really hard to get that newness in those old tropes that's necessary to keep a reader that maybe isn't all in on that trope all the time. And the same, I think, can be said for mysteries, right? Like, there are people who love cozy mysteries, and people who love spy thrillers, and people who want to be challenged, and people who don't want to be challenged. And I think that there's enough room for everybody. And romance genre is very much the same. But I do find it fascinating that right now, where we are in our history, romance is a huge seller, and the romantasy genre is a huge seller, and publishers want those books and are wanting to publish more and more books like the same thing over and over and over again. And I think the sort of quieter novels, the sort of deeply thought out novels, it's really hard to get the audience for those novels because people don't want to be challenged. They don't want to be challenged by them. And they are seeking to escape and not have a novel so closely aligned with either their real life or so that it interferes with their real life. They want to be able to put themselves in another place where things are going to work out. And even in mysteries, right? The mystery is solved at the end. It is not left open-ended. And that is a comfort to the reader and a promise that the story makes to them. Because nothing would be worse to a romance reader than to get to the end of this novel and have it be an unhappy ending. That's not the expectation. That's not what they want. And I think for me, why I don't read them very often is because the ambiguous or the unexpected is where I want to be. I want to be challenged as a reader, and I want to be thinking about how things can be flipped on their head. I think that's what made Normal People, Sally Rooney's Normal People, such a powerful story, is that the two stories were told in first-person point of view, and you could feel the love that they had for each other, but you could feel the push and the pull, the magnetic push and pull the whole time. And the ending really wasn't resolved, but it was resolved in a way that real life is, and that felt powerful in its economy because it's a very short novel. And she does a magical job, and all of her books do. She has a clear voice, and she's a great example of an author who has romantic elements in a story, but that's not the purpose of the story. And I think that Gabrielle Zevin in Tomorrow does the same thing. The primary relationship is the platonic relationship, not the romantic relationship. But I hope that the sort of hopefulness of the romantic genre is something that people can capture in their reading life and hold on to a little bit, is that sense of hope and that sense of promise, and maybe bring that over into their own real lives and see if they can make the endings of their own stories happy and hopeful. And it is something I've been thinking about a great deal as I'm writing myself, is how do I want to end this novel that I'm working on? Do I want it to be hopeful? And there's part of me that right now feels like the answer is yes, I do want it to be hopeful. So maybe I need to take a cue from Jane Austen or any of the newest and latest. Jenny Colgan comes to mind, of this sort of sweet hopefulness at the end of a lot of these stories. And even though it's not my go-to, even though my go-to will always be a little bit darker and a little bit more complex, I do see why people are craving this romance right now, this idea of romance right now. And so if you have read any romance novels that you think will change my mind, that you think will be amazing and I will love, please leave them in the comments. Please let me know. Reach out to me on any of the social and let me know what you think I should be reading in that genre, because I am open. As I said, I'm reading all kinds of things. And so I'm even reading Joanne Harris's Chocolat right now again, to kind of see, like, why is that a romance that I gravitate towards versus, something that's a little more pop culture-y. I don't know. So anyway, I hope you're well, and I'll speak to you again next week. Thanks for listening to The Literary Sipper. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. If you did, please subscribe and leave a rating and review if you're feeling especially generous. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep putting your voice in the world. It's waiting for you.